Okay, I don't have to bang my gavel. It's nice and quiet. Good afternoon. Today is March 19th. Welcome to the bill hearings for the Ways and Means Committee. First, we have the wonderful Chair Feldman here. Welcome.
Okay, I love this. The applause, everything. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senate Bill 372.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, you heard this crossfire from Delegate Polakovich Carr early in session, and I know the bill hasn't moved to date, but it's been over a month. And but Senate Bill 372 does relate, just to refresh everybody's memory, about when a candidate for governor picks his or her lieutenant governor. Right now, we're along with only 6 other states do it the way Maryland currently does it. A couple of things I'd like the committee to consider. First of all, many of you may not recall when Delegate Polakovich Carr presented the bill. This bill actually passed this committee both in 2020 and in 2022 and passed the entire House of Delegates with a strong majority. It stalled in the Senate for reasons I still can't figure out, but nonetheless, subsequent to the hearing that was in this committee earlier, about over a month ago at this point, my committee, the EEE committee, did vote the bill out 10-1, and then it went to the full Senate and passed 40-6 on a strong bipartisan basis. The bill would require a constitutional change. It would be on the ballot this November if passed, and in its current form would apply to the 2026 elections if the voters of Maryland vote yes, although I'll throw out an idea at the end of the committee for its possible adjustment to the timeline. Just by, again, I know sponsor only, just a little historical context, which I think is interesting. The position of lieutenant governor in Maryland was first actually created in 1864, but in 1867, basically that constitution was thrown out and a new constitution was put in place in 1867 without. And they abolished the office of lieutenant governor. So from 1867 to 1970, we did not have a lieutenant governor in the state of Maryland over 100 years later. What happened was, in effect, was in the late 60s, then Governor Spiro Agnew was selected by Richard Nixon to be his vice presidential running mate. And Governor Agnew then resigned before the inauguration, January 69, to become vice president of the United States. And at that time, the legislature selected the governor, kind of like we do treasurer right now. They had a joint session of the General Assembly, and the House and Senate came together and elected House Speaker Marvin Mandel to be governor, similar again how we elect state treasurer. After that experience, around 1969-70, it was decided that, you know what, an LG, a lieutenant governor, is probably not a bad idea, and thus a constitutional amendment was approved by the voters in November 1970. None of us are around, and we're around 1970 in this chamber, so I don't know the genesis for the current process whereby folks running for governor must pick the lieutenant governor running mate prior to the primary election, which can often be a year and a half before the general election. So at the federal level, obviously, we're electing someone this year to serve in the highest office in our nation in November, the presidency. And the selection of a running mate at the federal level, of course, will not take place until after the respective nominees have won the primary. In fact, it won't even happen until the conventions. And this year, it's going to be for the Republicans in July and for the Democrats in August of this year. As far as how other states handle it, it's all over the board. We have 5 states that don't have a lieutenant governor at all. 17 states elect governor and lieutenant governor separately, and then all the way to the general election. Like for example, in Virginia, you can have a governor and lieutenant governor of a different party. 7 states run the governor, lieutenant governor in separate primaries, and then the respective winners come together to join a ticket for the general election. 8 states do it, or several states do it like they do at the federal level. You have to win the nomination. We here in Maryland, only 6 states do it the way we do it. Again, where you pick your running mate at the time you file for office prior to even being the party nominee. And so let me just give you, and then I'm going to wrap up, 3 basic arguments, I think, as to why a change makes sense. And it revolves, I would say, around the basic proposition that the pool of potential lieutenant governor candidates should be as broad as possible. It's the ultimate bipartisan concept. I mean, the current system does limit in multiple ways the potential candidates for lieutenant governor. So for example, look at the 2022 election. We had 10 candidates running on the Democratic side, 4 on the Republican side. In some cases, it might well have made sense to consider picking one of your opponents. That's, if you think about it, whether it was President Reagan picking George Bush, they had a primary. The first person who came in the second spot was strong, ran strong, demonstrated a lot to the electorate. They came together and forged a ticket. We have all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. He picked his entire cabinet. There's a book called The Team of Rivals. All the folks running for the presidency got incorporated into President Lincoln's new cabinet. Unlike the current system in Maryland, you cannot basically pick one of your opponents running for governor. You actually would have to persuade them to drop out of the gubernatorial race in order to pick them. So that, I think, is one potential argument that, in terms of, again, broadening the pool of potential lieutenant governors. Another part of it is, if you think about it right now, all the elected officials in our state, including members of this body, the Senate, House, Maryland General Assembly, or county elected officials all over, essentially, who could potentially be good candidates for lieutenant governor, are sort of excluded. And specifically, if you were approached, anybody in this room were approached by somebody, one of 10 candidates to run for LG, you'd have to make a decision. You'd basically have to give up your current seat, couldn't run for re-election because of the time here. And I think that, again, as opposed to after the primary, if that's a candidate wins the primary and then approaches you potentially to run for lieutenant governor on a ticket, that's a very different analysis. But under the current system, again, I'll say argument number 2 would be it excludes pretty much all the elected officials in the state of Maryland from being on a ticket, except that you have to, again, make a decision to essentially give up your seat or not run for re-election. And third, I think, is a political one, which is after the primary, then you know who your general election opponent is. Under the current system, you don't even know who you're running against. And so, you know, politically, you make decisions. That certainly can play out at the federal level with the presidency. But the third distinct argument would be is you should have the benefit of knowing who your general election opponent is before you make a political decision to pick a running mate. Again, under the current system in Maryland, you're picking a running mate a year and a half before the general election, before you even know who your opponent is. That also doesn't make a great deal of sense. So as I said, I'm not sure what the dynamic was in this committee in 2020 and 2022 when the Ways and Means Committee and the full House passed the bill, or why the bill failed the Senate. But it has passed the Senate this session overwhelmingly, and I asked this committee to do what it did twice before, give it a favorable report. One final thought, Madam Chair, would be, I just want to make it abundantly clear that it has nothing to do with the current lieutenant governor, my former district mate, my constituent, who's done a fantastic job. But if the committee might want to consider making this bill applicable, so it doesn't have anything to do with any current office holders, applicable to after the 2026 election, that might be something the committee might want to consider, but I just put that out there for the committee's consideration. And with that, I'll certainly field questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll start with Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing this bill. I'll pose the similar question that I did to the House sponsor. So I have an article up here in front of me. It's dated June 29th, 1990, and it's in the Washington Post, and it says, Maryland Republican gubernatorial candidate William S. Shepard has picked his wife, Lois, to run for lieutenant governor with him in the November election. Now, in that instance, the voters were able to know that ahead of the filing deadline and ahead of when they made their choice. The bill that you just presented to us, you posed a good scenario where we pick maybe the leading competitor or maybe the most qualified person. However, in the spirit of transparency, as happened in 1990, someone could make a very poor choice and a very non-transparent choice. And the voters who elected that person would be stuck with that very bad choice. So what would be your comments to that scenario?
First of all, no, they're not stuck. We have something called a general election. So if they made that choice, that would presumably be reflected or taken into account when you get to the general election. It certainly is not a problem when it comes to the highest nation, the highest office in our nation. It does it this way, and if the fact is the presidency and vice presidency, it's worked. I think most people vote top of the ticket, but if, this idea, it came up on the other side. It's legitimate. You want the benefit of knowing who the ticket is. I say that we're one of 6 states that do it the current way, but I think that ultimately the remedy would be in the general election. If somebody's made a super poor choice, then they would probably pay a political price when it came to November. And so I guess that would be my best response, but I understand the argument.
Okay, thank you,
Certainly
Madam Chair.
do.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 372. House Bill 1524, and Greg Cross is going to present, and Eric Lukey is here as well. And we have joining us folks from Appropriations, Delegates Ruff, Stanco, and Harris, but I believe only Ruff is here with us. Welcome. If you have any questions, just let me know.
And Madam Chair, if you don't mind, Mark Brody, who's the Executive Director of the Racetrack Operating Authority as well. No.
I'm a late addition.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, lovely to see you all again. For the record, Eric Lukey, Chief Legislative Officer to the Governor of Maryland. I'm here to provide a history of Maryland racing in 2 minutes or less, and then to introduce our panelists here. But genuinely, this has been an issue that this committee has been grappling with as long as I've been in and around Annapolis. It was one of the first issues I dealt with when I was a new delegate. And at the time, the discussion was around the development of a 10-year plan to sustain horse racing in the state of Maryland. That 10-year plan stabilized the industry. It has now run its course, but the industry has continued to change. And in order for us to continue to sustain the industry, we need to take further action. That's what this bill is about. This bill is an outgrowth of efforts by this committee and the General Assembly last year in authorizing the creation of a new authority, the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority, who was tasked with the responsibility to identify a plan for the industry going forward. And that's an important policy goal to have. Because this industry is important for a lot of reasons, not just pride. People talk about the history of Maryland racing. People talk about the fact that the Preakness has been run in the state of Maryland for now almost 150 years and how much of a part of our culture it is. But it is also a key part of our state's economy. Maryland has more horses per square mile than any other state in the country. The racing industry and other equine industries are a cornerstone of Maryland agriculture, of the economy in many parts of the state, including the district I used to represent and many of your districts as well. So it is important that we continue these efforts. It is important that we get it right. It's important that we continue racing in Maryland and sustain the Preakness for another 150 years after next year's celebration. And with that, I will turn it over to the 2 other panelists, Mr. Greg Cross, who is the chairman of the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority, and Mr. Mark Brody, who is the executive director of the authority. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority is a mouthful, so we go by MTROA. Make my remarks a little easier. I have some brief remarks. But before I begin, I want to thank Chair Atterbury for introducing this bill, and I want to thank you all for gathering on short notice to hear me. HB 1524 represents the culmination of efforts which literally date back decades, as Mr. Lukey was alluding to find a path forward for Maryland thoroughbred horse racing and to address desperately needed repairs at the Maryland racetrack facilities. As this committee is aware, this is the 4th legislative effort in just the past 5 years to address these problems. In both 2020 and 22, the legislature authorized $375 million to be spent to improve the facilities at Laurel Park and Pimlico. Those efforts were unfortunately a failure. Cost estimates exceeded the budgeted authorization by no less than $130 million and by as much as $300 million for some designs. And even if those efforts had not been wildly over budget, no agreements could be reached with the Stronach Group regarding how funds would be invested or the future of the tracks. At the end of the last session, the MTROA was created and tasked to take another look at both the options for repairing the at both the options for facilities repair and replacement and different operating structures for the future of Maryland thoroughbred horse racing if Maryland was going to make the investment. After months of meetings and investigations, the MTROA made its recommendations on January 5th of this year, setting forth an entirely new approach. Rather than investing in 2 tracks, the MTROA recommends focusing on the investment on Pimlico, the home of the Preakness and the historic home of Maryland racing. In lieu of the expense of 2 tracks, we recommend supplementing Pimlico with a state-of-the-art racing training facility, and to that end have identified 3 leading options for the training center's location. The change of approach had the effect of dramatically decreasing investment costs, bringing them in line with the legislature's prior allocations. Copies of the MTROA's report and the reports of our consultants are available on our website. Further, the MTROA recommends that Maryland follow the operational models of Del Mar and the New York Racing Authority, which vest ownership of the facilities with the state and operational responsibility for all racing with a not-for-profit 501c4 entity. It was the MTROA's view that with this approach, the state would be investing in itself and the equine industry that has a $2 billion direct economic impact rather than subsidizing a private operator. It is also our view that this approach will allow the industry to take responsibility for itself, and in the case of the Preakness, control the way that the city and the state's marquee event is presented to the world. The MTROA named its plan Pimlico Plus and did so for a reason. We want to see the state's investment not just benefit the horse racing industry, but maximize collateral benefits to the Park Heights community and the training center location. In furtherance of those objectives, the proposed plan contemplates 365 days of economic activity in Park Heights as opposed to just a 2-week Preakness meet, a $10 million direct investment in the neighborhood for workforce housing, construction of a 1,000-seat flexible use event space in the clubhouse, construction of a hotel in partnership with BDC, construction of a new parking garage in partnership with Medco and LifeBridge Health to alleviate persistent parking issues caused by the track and associated events, creation of a multi-purpose field to host festivals and events, the incorporation of workforce training in all phases of the project, the creation of a veterinary facility located in Park Heights adjacent to the track, and 6 acres of adjoining parcels in Park Heights that can be made available for future development. The MTROA has committed to do all the above in partnership with the community and has renewed its commitment to the Pimlico Compact. Our executive director, Mr. Brody, grew up in Park Heights, and he and I have been meeting regularly with community leaders and pledged to continue to do so. Our recommendations have received support from both the Maryland Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association and the Maryland Breeders Association, as well as positive feedback from the community and political leaders. But implementation of the recommendations that were announced in January were contingent upon finalizing agreements with the Stronach Group before any legislation could go forward. I'm pleased to report that subject to completion of the MTROA's due diligence, if HB 1524 is approved, and if the transaction between the MTROA and the Stronach Group is approved by the Board of Public Works, all of the following will occur. Pimlico will transfer to the state of Maryland on July 1st for $1. The MTROA's operating entity will be permitted to use the Laurel racetrack rent-free for 3 years while Pimlico is rebuilt. All Preakness and Maryland horse racing memorabilia currently owned by the Maryland Jockey Club will be transferred to the state, with the Woodlawn vase being made available on permanent loan. The Stronach Group will transfer to the MTROA's operating entity all rights to conduct day-to-day racing in Maryland commencing January 1, 2025. And the new 501c4 operator will continue to employ virtually all the people currently employed by the Maryland Jockey Club. Lastly, the state will hold a perpetual license to run the Black-Eyed Susan and Preakness Stakes beginning in 2027, when Pimlico is scheduled to reopen in exchange for a licensing fee to be paid out of event proceeds. The changes that HB 1524 makes to the 2020 and 2022 legislation to facilitate these recommendations are minimal. The bill substitutes the MTROA for the Stronach Group as the owner, reallocates funds from 2 tracks to Pimlico and a training facility, and increases the bonding authority by $25 million to facilitate the housing investment and the purchase of the training center. In order to offset the increased bonding costs caused by interest rate changes, the bill proposes to redirect future RIFRA funds that would have been paid to the Stronach Group for Rosecroft to subsidize bond debt service, approximately $1.2 million a year. I want to emphasize, however, that the proposed legislation does not seek to take any money away from Ocean Downs, nor does it call for any money to be spent from this year's budget or for additional state money to be spent to subsidize horse racing operations on a going forward basis. No money. When I was first asked to help the state in 2010 during the Preakness, basically Mr. Lukey's history, I researched the state's efforts to address the condition of Pimlico and the industry and discovered that it doesn't just date back 10 years. These efforts date back to the 1970s. New efforts came up basically every 10 years. But despite best intentions, they all failed, largely in my opinion, because they were always half steps and because at the end of the day, the state lacked control over the implementation. This time is different. We will be investing unencumbered by the past at a time when the industry is undergoing change and making investments that account for those changes, at a time when our Triple Crown partners in Kentucky and New York are doing exactly the same thing. The MTROA believes that if this legislation is enacted, it will position the industry to succeed for the next 100 years, and we urge its adoption. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for hearing us out today. You know, the public deserves this. The community deserves it surrounding Park Heights. It's the right time for the state, and we're under budget, and it's going to work out in everyone's best interest. We've run all the traps. We've done all the research and analysis. I urge everyone who's interested to look at our report, the full report that we have on our website. And I think it's just the right time and a good move for Maryland. So thank you.
Could you just give us your name for the record?
Oh, yes, Mark Brody, Executive Director.
Thank you. First, I want to say, Mr. Cross, I want to thank you for all your work in this area. This was a Herculean task, and a lot of us on this committee are new. We do have some old heads like Delegate Buckle, whose light was first to light up. And so this is very complex on how the different parties are intertwined. It's very complex, and I'm still, have a chart in my office trying to keep track of it. So thank you very much. I just want to ask a quick question, and then we'll get to everyone. Why did the authority determine that a nonprofit model was the best path forward for Maryland's racing in the long term?
The tension to this is a classic model for state investment. There's not enough profit to justify the investment that needs to be made in the facilities to get the return. But we as a state benefit exponentially from the investment because it's $2 billion of direct economic impact, $1 billion of collateral economic impact. 25% of our green space is tied to this, but a private operator doesn't have that motivation. The not-for-profit model allows us to plow back into the horse racing industry, all the proceeds from the horse racing industry without fighting for that profit line. And it allows the state to benefit from the investment that it's making. I mean, for the first time ever, we'll actually make money on the Preakness Stakes because we invested in the facility rather than building something for someone else who owns it and operates it and takes that profit.
With that, we will start with Delegate Buckle.
Madam Chair, I'm old apparently. When I started on this committee, we had a young, enthusiastic chair of the used to be called Racing and Gaming Committee. He's sitting right to your left, and so he was the first person that I dealt with on a lot of these issues 10 years ago. And so I just have a couple of questions. I do appreciate what you just said. So nonprofit could operate horse racing essentially in Maryland and break even. Do you think you could work it out so that all of your costs and expenditures are at a break even without having to be additionally subsidized beyond the purse dedication account and RIFRA monies and things that we already have carved out from VLTs and other gambling sources?
Yes, we actually, our financial consultant here, Craig Jagorik, I stumbled on his name. We've modeled it out. Our most difficult years will be the couple of years that we're at Laurel because we don't have the new facility, we don't have ancillary streams, and we'll run at a profit at Laurel. It'll be a small profit, but we will, and that's the deal, right? We're asking for the investment premised on the fact that the horsemen will be responsible for balancing the books.
And so, you know, I'm not skeptical in a negative way, but I think I have a healthy degree of skepticism because you read, and I'm not saying Stronach is the world's greatest corporate partner in these matters, but you read where they're suggesting that they want out of this market and out of this enterprise to a certain extent because they claim that they are bleeding money. They claim that they are losing millions and millions and millions of dollars a year operating Pimlico. Is it the position that that can be rectified solely by focusing all of the racing instead of Pimlico and Laurel? We'll focus it all on Pimlico and we'll have a new facility.
So we have their numbers. So it's not like we're just making it up.
Sure.
But they suffer from a couple of things. 2 facilities is a constant bleed. Cutting to 1 cuts the loss and cuts it by 50%. The upkeep on both of the facilities. I mean, some of these, I've read physical condition facilities on both sites. Some of the places in both facilities date from when they were originally constructed. It's really bad.
Right.
There's not an operating elevator at Pimlico. They have to bring in a portable one to run the Preakness. There's not an operating kitchen at Pimlico, for example. Laurel's better, but not a lot because a lot of the things you don't see are worse. All those things cost money. The other thing is they don't have the ability to make the investment to actually profit from the Preakness because they have to build the tents. And when you sell the tickets to the tents, you basically break even with once you built the tent. So part of this is when you build a new facility, you create the ability to make the profit. But because we've sat, no, you haven't sat, everybody here has tried. But because nothing has happened over 50 years, you know, they said, hey, we would make the investment if we had a return on investment, but there's no possible way that you could generate an appropriate return on investment for a $400 million investment in horse racing without the state doing it.
And so did they take the position that if the state, and I prefer the state having more influence rather than just a giveaway to them, but did they take the position that if we would spend the $375 million to rebuild Pimlico for them, they would keep it and continue to operate horse racing? I'm just concerned about the future of horse racing in terms of we get 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road and it turns out that we're losing money every year and then it has to be additionally subsidized. People like Stronach, who should be experts at this, I mean, it's part of the industries that they're in, they seem to suggest that that's a possibility. What is it that makes us think that that's not going to happen? That will be, is it just we're building the new facility, we're cutting the bleed, as you put it, in half, and we're betting on, you know, not to be cute about it, we're betting on the success of having horse racing beyond the Preakness? Because $375 million for 1 week is a tough sell. That's a tough sell for a lot of people across the state. $375 to support, $375 million to support an industry that breeds and raises horses that run year round or seasonally year round makes more sense.
That's right. And what you see in the for-profit operators is typically they'll cut the race dates way down. And that just penalizes the local farmer, which is exactly who we want to benefit, right? Which is another reason that we want to be a not-for-profit. We want to be able to run those more race dates because we're not looking to squeeze the last nickel out. We're actually looking to make an investment in the industry. And it's the people who are the industry that are going to be sitting at the table helping to make the decision. That's why we're going to do better. And yeah, anything could fail. But look at NYRA, which is the model in the United States right now, and they're doing exactly what we're doing, and they're applauding the effort. Years ago, the decision was made to de-link casinos from the racetracks, which is what props it up in other states. You know, NYRA is closer to our model, but they're taking ownership of it themselves wins and is successful.
My last area of inquiry, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, is the issue about how we're going to pay. I really appreciated, I think, what Mr. Rifkin and Mr. Foreman helped to create 4 years ago, whatever it was, and others. It was a very elegant formula that really didn't distribute funds from where they otherwise would have been distributed, and yet allowed them to bond up to enough of a number that they hoped that would build both facilities. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Now you're adding about $25 million in bonding authority. Am I reading that correctly, to what we had previously approved?
No, it was, oh yes, we are adding
You're
25
adding
million.
25 million in bonding authority. How is that done financially? And I guess I'll premise it with this. I have a concern about the standardbred industry is a little bit different. You know, they're part of horse racing, but they're a little bit different pocket of it. And so it looks like, even though you say you're not taking money from Ocean Downs per se, we are redistributing RIFRA funds that went into the standardbred industry writ large to kind of keep those standardbred dates. Is that the only financing mechanism to enable us to bond the additional 25 million? Is the 1.2 that's being redirected from the Rosecroft RIFRA cut out of the standardbred industry and into this mechanism?
Well, there are 4 additional revenue streams in the bill.
Okay.
There's RIFRA was underestimated by about $1 million. So that money is being allocated. And that's just been there. It was just a miss when Mr. Foreman and others put it together.
Okay.
There's $300,000 of taxes on claimers that's included in the bill. And there's approximately $1.2 million of RIFRA ongoing funds, which were dedicated to Rosecroft, and those are the only funds that are being redirected, and it's being redirected on a percentage basis that actually is more favorable to Ocean Downs than had we not. So if you look at the percentage of handle, the amount of money that would be redirected to the bonding, and then the amount of money that would be left behind for Ocean Downs is higher than the amount that Ocean Downs.
Than what they would have got if we wouldn't have changed it. But will it change their number of dates? I guess so Rosecroft runs X number of days. I know Rosecroft has, been financially difficult for years. They run X number of days. Ocean Downs runs Y number of days. It adds up to Z days for the standardbred industry in Maryland. If Rosecroft isn't going to run any days, which is obvious, is probable, would Ocean Downs have the ability, wouldn't it be beneficial for them to potentially pick up some dates and maybe expand some of their facilities and their upkeep and maintenance, which may give them, that's the only part of the plan that I don't really kind of like, is the ability to take that 1.2 and maybe give some more of that to the standardbred industry.
So understand this. There's $7 million of unspent RIFRA funds sitting for Ocean Downs to make improvements today.
Okay.
They get an extra $1 million every year. The RIFRA funds match 50-50. There's $500,000 of requests from Ocean Downs to do capital improvements in the coming years. So they've got $6.5 million of unused capacity and $1 million growing every year. So they'd have to have and those have to be racetrack investments, not hotel or otherwise. So they'd have to have $7 million of capital needs to even access the funds that are there on a dollar for dollar match. That would be $14 million of capital spent. We're not, when I got this job, I was like, I don't want to hurt anybody because I understood the politics of it. And we didn't, you don't want to get any enemies. And we certainly weren't trying to pick an enemy with Ocean Downs by the way this was constructed. We were actually trying to be generous in the split and the redirection and just take money that would otherwise go into Stronach that wasn't going to be spent.
And my very last question, what is Stronach getting paid? I know Stronach's transferring all their physical assets for $1. But it talks about Stronach is entering into some type of a licensing agreement, IP, whatever they have control of the term previous.
It's a licensing fee that commences in 27.
And how much is that going to be?
$3 million and 2% of handle.
So they're going to
2% of handle on the Preakness and Black-Eyed Susan.
So they're going to get $3 million a year in perpetuity, or
$3 million a year as long as we continue the license, plus 2% of the handle in those 2 days.
Okay, so they're getting 2% of the gross handle, no deductions?
Yes, it'll be a figure that's calculated on that basis.
Okay, so 2% of the gross handle figure that'll come out for the Preakness and the
Black-Eyed Susan, that Friday and Saturday.
Friday race. Okay, so the 2 biggest race days, and then $3 million a year in perpetuity as long as you maintain the facility and the Preakness.
And as long as it's a 10-year license that renews every 5. So we can cancel it after 10 if we decide we don't want to do that. In that instance, they'll run the race and they pay us rent.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the clarification.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So the questions that the minority leader has not already asked, I'll go to those. First of all, Mr. Brody and Mr. Cross, thank you so much for this thoughtful work, and also our former colleague, Mr. Lukey, very much appreciate seeing you. This is a very thoughtful presentation and plan. We really appreciate you helping to lead our work as we figure out the future of horse racing in our state. I have been on the committee long enough for the last plan that came around that we approved. And I'm still trying to unpack a bit, sort of how we can make sure that we're not coming back in another couple of years. We've been dealing with a lot of financial challenges, as a state, and the possibility of having to come back around and having to potentially supplement this if it falls through is definitely a major concern that I have. And I want to better understand what the safeguards are, what is in place that will make this different. I know a lot of some of what has been sketched out was also in the previous plan as well, in terms of utilizing the facility year round and things like that. So if you can talk us through in greater detail how you can sort of help allay those fears and those concerns.
With respect to construction costs, we employed the leading architect in the world for racetracks, and they developed, I would call it design development stage plans for both Pimlico and the training center and costed them out. And then we gave them to our friends at the Stadium Authority, who added on a lot of contingencies, and the numbers that we're presenting represent the aggregate of those two estimates combined. They're fairly confident, particularly the race course. The architects are very confident in the numbers. So I think in terms of the aggregate spend on the 400, we generally know what the training center is going to cost us. It depends on selection. We have different things that are at different price points. We know what the housing investment is, and we know what the construction costs are. So I'm pretty comfortable on the aggregate spend in that way. With respect to the operational expenses, we're going to isolate it at the 501c4. Right, so they're going to take the employees, they're going to take the contracts. We're going through the due diligence now. We have gone through the books. In fact, Mr. Jagorik was just reviewing some numbers with me that the estimates were pretty much spot on based upon some recent data that he got. And then they show us running at, a 7-figure profit in the years that we're at Laurel, and we'll have additional revenue streams when we move back to Baltimore, and hopefully additional interest. But we're not building it. We're not doing a build it and they will come model. We're not doing it on hope. We're doing it on actual numbers, the Stronach Group's actual numbers. We're making our estimates on that. Again, anything could fail, but this is our best path forward. And based upon every number that we have, using the people who run these numbers for the industry, we believe that we can not only make it work, but make it a success.
Okay, and no additional state funds
For operations, no.
for operations?
Or the bill or the construction, other than the 400 million. I want to be clear.
Okay, I'm making sure we're on the same page. And just to be clear as well, I understand this is a binding agreement. So if you can talk more about what that means, because there are certain things that I guess that have to happen, certain stipulations, so you can talk more detail about that.
So we actually have completed contracts signed by the Stronach Group that are subject to approvals. And the only things that they're subject to are enactment of this legislation, approval of the Board of Public Works, and my sign off on due diligence, or the MTRA sign off on due diligence. And if all three of those things happen, the Stronach Group is committed to the transaction.
Thank you. I just have 2 more questions, Madam Chair. I'll make them quick. I know we have a lot of people who want to ask questions. In terms of going back to the Standardbred, I know that there is a concern in the way that the funds are going to be distributed, where they're receiving 20% and it may go down. Can you please explain that and what the potential impact is going to be on our Standardbred?
So again, and I'm not trying to pick on the Standardbred industry. I hope they thrive and are successful. So historically, the monies are split based upon handle percentages, and my understanding is that 20% exceeds what Ocean Downs percentage is. And it may be tied to race dates. I don't actually. It's not my charge. I've got the thoroughbreds, but that was the way that formula was calculated, and I've been assured when it was put into the bill that the split exceeded what would have normally gone to Ocean Downs in terms of the economic division.
Okay, I appreciate that. We have to look at that a little bit more. Final question. In terms of Pimlico, a lot of us attend that. It's definitely a pride here in Maryland and in the Baltimore region. What is the expectation? Is it 2 years? Will Pimlico be run at Laurel? What is the expectation in terms of that specific race and
So
the
the-
changes in impact?
The Stronach Group's going to run the race 24, 25, and 26. 24 is, of course, in Baltimore. 25 had been in doubt. I would put it in the 85% range that 25 will be in Baltimore as well. The Stadium Authority has worked out the construction schedule so that we can allow that to happen. We're going to do a partial demo, like the condemned portion. They're going to take that down and you sort of get it started on the way. So 25 will be in Baltimore. 26 will be at Laurel. It'll just be 1 year. And then we hope to be back in 27 and the state will be running it in 27.
Thank you so much.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the diligence that you put into this. I know it's been a multi-year. As one of the members that served on this committee with Delegate Lukey in the past, it's been exciting. I want to point out there's a lot that goes into that final race day. In other words, those horses have to be stabled somewhere. They have the ability to exercise, to breeze, to all of these great things that go into that final event. My question to you is, where I represent Cecil County, we have one of the largest facilities in the state, and we also have the largest horse per capita of people in the state as well. But I didn't hear any mention made of the track and training facility that we have located on state property, which is the Fair Hill Training Center. And my question to you is, in order to make this thing successful, we want to have these horses in Maryland. We want to have them bred in Maryland, raced in Maryland, boarded in Maryland. Is there any leeway in there to maybe steer some of these funds to a property like Fair Hill so that we can ensure that these horses and the folks that deal with them are supported?
I completely agree. Fair Hill is fantastic. I spent a great day up there being toured around, and the folks who run Fair Hill have been very, very supportive. Very supportive. And I agree that we can leverage Fair Hill. I don't think that we need to leverage them out of these funds. The turf track up there,
Yeah, the
for
defeated
example,
track.
right? We got organized in July. I had to get to a report by July and then a deal with Stronach by March. So there's only so much I used to have a legal practice.
Sure.
I think that the turf facility at Fair Hill is going to want to be used, prominently used, and can be developed very inexpensively because it's one of the finest turf courses in North America reportedly, but we don't race on it for various reasons that I don't want to go into today.
Sure.
But the second half of this year, I intend for our committee to start looking at that and how we can open it up and how we can make use of that facility and how we can run a turf meet in Fair Hill, because that's one of the things at Pimlico. It's not going to be as wide as Laurel's turf course. So it limits in some ways the number of days. So we're hoping to supplement. It's just this came first.
Sure.
And frankly, when I sent the report out, I sent a note to the Fair Hill people saying we haven't been forgotten because I'm very impressed and you are on the radar.
Yeah, well, help us help you, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future. Thank you.
Delegate Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel. So if you could talk a little bit more about, I think the comment was that the idea is that this will maximize benefits to Park Heights community. So I represent the 40th district, and we share Pimlico with our 41st district colleagues. Although it's not directly in the 40th district, those neighboring communities, those individuals, I represent them. So could you talk a little bit more about two things? So I was reading the bill previously and I saw that there was $10 million for the training facility site. But then I think in Greg's testimony, you mentioned that there would be $10 million for housing workforce investment, or $10 million for workforce housing. So I'm trying to understand if you could just clarify, I don't see 10 million. I'm sorry, I realize I misspoke. It was 110 million for the training facility, but I don't see the 10 million that you mentioned in the legislation.
The 10 million, it's 10 million at both sites. Actually, we need to build dormitories at the training facility site because it'll be more rural.
Okay.
We're going to invest 10 million directly into the community and neighboring housing in Park Heights. It's just embedded in the aggregate numbers.
So I want to clarify, is the 10 million going for housing for like the jockeys and not the jockeys, but the folks that work at Pimlico, or those that work at at Laurel, or is it going into housing that will be accessible to people in the community?
It's going to be generic workforce housing, but we're going to create inventory stock, and we have not worked out yet if there's going to be any priority for people who are working at the track if we're making the investment, but it'll be new investment in and immediately around the track. In fact, you want it in the closest proximity possible.
Okay, so it will be for the community.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Because I think one of the, we are also proud, as my colleague Vice Chair mentioned, obviously in Baltimore, we're so proud to have the Preakness. I'm proud that we have it across the state. But I think one of the challenges, which I know this committee has heard previously before, and this is often reiterated, is that it feels like there's a significant amount of investment going into the track itself, right? Which is great. We understand those benefits. I don't want to, besmirch and say, oh, there's no value for that. But when you think about 400 million in terms of the bond, now we're going from 375 million to 400 million, and you look at $10 million, that's only 2.5% of the total amount that's being bonded, right? And so I think what I would like to know more about is like, how exactly are you all working with the city around the redevelopment around Pimlico? So not just the actual state, not just the racetrack itself, but the surrounding community, because there's about 65 acres of land that was cleared with the hopes that it would be a part of that redevelopment. And I don't see any mentioning in here around a community benefits plan or anything like that. So I'm curious, I do see this mention of the of there being a MOU with the Department of Housing and Community Development, but I don't see any mention of explicit community benefits agreement.
So a lot of the community benefits agreements embodied in the Pimlico Compact, and that's been added, that we've reaffirmed the commitment. We didn't really need it. We needed to add it, but we're already doing it. We have those conversations. And so that's being picked up in that document, which is a pretty lengthy document that was signed years ago. And that compact group meets monthly, and we've been participating in all their meetings and having an open dialogue. So that's where that piece is embedded. What we've tried to do is maximize those things that can benefit the community on the site, because I'm just racetrack, not mayor necessarily. And so,
yes, you're not the mayor. I can tell.
So the things that we've added to benefit the community on the track are a hotel. There's no hotel in that area whatsoever. We want to build that in conjunction with BDC. The parking garage, which is the greatest complaint you hear when you sit with the compact group, because the parking is just a nightmare for the Preakness. So if we add 1,000 or 2,000 car parking garage, that's going to benefit for the Preakness and other events, as well as the hospital. The plans that were tentatively designed have a tunnel connecting the parking garage to the infield. So it will be good to host festivals because people can park in the garage, immediately access the infield. That'll be an amenity for the community. I've heard from the community also that 1,000 seat event space is great, but they might like something that it's a smaller space that they can rent more inexpensively. I want to roll that into the next evolution of these plans. The workforce training and incorporation into the project is important. But I started out when I first met the folks from Park Heights and was touring around. I said, this is not going to work if we build a new facility and there's a moat around it. I mean, the idea here is to have the community have ownership over it and pride in it and involvement in it, and then it'll work. But the other side is, you need to invest in scale, in my opinion. Like the harbor and other places, you put money down and you create a hub of economics that then people come and invest around it. And that's what I hope we'll see. You're right. There's a lot of developable land around there, but we need people to want to come rather than begging them to come. And I think if we get this right, then they'll want to come. And
I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree, but I do think that there's already like a master plan in place. Like there's a lot of work that's already taking place. There's people that are interested in Park Heights. So I don't think in terms of do we want to attract more people? Yes, but are we attracting people currently? We are attracting to that area. So my question also, my last question is just, is there any open or any, would there be openness? This might be more for the state. But is there any openness to expanding the bonding authority to be able to include more resources for some of that development in partnership with the city? Is there any opportunity to perhaps look at, leveraging some of the PCDA funds to underwrite some of the bonding authority, but is there any opportunity to perhaps expand the bonding authority to support the development that is taking place in the Park Heights to supplement that development that's taking place? Because we know we are in dire fiscal straits, so we are going to have to find some creative ways to be able to do that. at the state level, and there is a significant investment need. And I would hate for us to have this new shiny, amazing Pimlico racetrack, but we don't have a new shiny kind of development, burgeoning community around that racetrack.
Sure, it's a fair question. I think in this bill, this bonding authority is specifically for the Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority and their facilities. The facilities that are not on the racetrack are not really under the purview of the authority. That said, the governor has been committed in all the major projects that he's been involved in so far, the Orioles, Camden Yards conversations, the FBI building, to ensuring that any investment the state makes in these large projects have offsite benefits. In the governor's opinion, there is no Pimlico without Park Heights. He believes deeply that we need to invest in the community. And it's one of the reasons that he proposed in the budget this year, significant increases in DHCD funding for rental housing works, for Project Core. Many of those dollars will end up going into the communities in the 40th and the 41st. And that's a long-term commitment that this administration has made. But as to your specific question about the bonding authority, this bonding authority is specific to the racing facilities and the ancillary workforce housing. So it's a larger conversation about the ongoing DHCD investments, and not just the housing side, but the community development side as well.
Okay, well, I would just end by saying, I think it would be nice to see more than $10 million for workforce housing coming out of this bonding capacity is all I'm going to end with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Delegate Attar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Cross, and everyone for working on this. Along the lines of Delegate Wells' question, as she mentioned, Pimlico is in District 41, and I, along with Delegate Ruff and Delegate Rosenberg, we're all in this room because this is extremely important to us. Our priority is the community. And I want to make it clear, I've lived within 5 minutes of Pimlico my entire life. My fondest memory of Preakness is I think I was in 2nd grade and I wanted to see the horses running and my parents wouldn't take me. So I disappeared and tried walking there and I was lost for 5 hours. So I have a lot of history with this. But for years, I'd hear about promises being made to the communities, the community around there. And then the last 6 years, when I've been in office, I've been part of the one making those promises over and over again to the communities. And at this point, it's not fair and it's not right. So I know you spoke a little bit about already the commitments in the bill to the communities. I want to know, one, if you can elaborate a little bit more on that. And number two, what is your view more generally about the redevelopment around Pimlico, to the communities around Pimlico? And I know you mentioned that you're not the mayor, you're the racetrack, but the reality is this is about the entire community, as Delegate Wells was saying, an entire community that has been disinvested in for so long, and it's about time we get things rolling.
That's a big question.
I know.
So the first time I went to Park Heights, the folks who toured us around, they looked at me halfway through and they said, same thing you've been saying. We've been hearing about this for so many years. Is anything ever going to happen? Because year after year it's been promised and year after year nothing happens. And what I can say is, as a beginning, this is going to happen. I said then I mixed my metaphors and said, we're going to go into the end zone this time. And I really believe it. You know, we have a plan that will work. And for various reasons, over all those 10 years that I was searching, you know, it was a half step because this wasn't perfect or that wasn't perfect, or maybe another day we won't have to spend the money. And it never happened. All those years, it never happened. Even the last 6 years, when there was $375 million authorized, it couldn't get done because the numbers weren't right. Nobody could get a deal. Now I have a deal. I have inked papers that will make this a reality if we pass the bill. With respect to the adjoining areas, there's a lot of areas in Park Heights that can. Pastor Gaines has development just across the street that's ready to go. There's 17 acres sitting across the street, what used to be an old middle school site that is unused and is available for development. And I hope that that development stretches far past Pimlico and all into Park Heights. But my authority ends at sort of the property lines currently, although we're actively involved and are going to be sitting there coming to the compact meetings with you every month for the next however long I have this job, trying to maximize the benefits. And a lot of it's just blocking and tackling one day at a time. And that's what I think we're going to have to do. And hopefully people will say that we kept our word and we actually got it done.
So I appreciate that. And you are at all the compact meetings. I even miss some and you don't. So thank you for that. I guess the last thing I'd say, and I know Delegate Ruff is going to ask more about this as well, so I'll leave some for him. But the last thing I'll say is, I know you said it's happening now. I too was here a couple of years ago when we passed the other legislation, and I went home and I told my community it's happening now.
I understand.
And thank you, Madam Chair, for sponsoring the bill.
Delegate Ruff.
For the first time. And I'm very glad to see all my friends who are championing this project, which is desperately needed and I would like to see come to fruition. I do want to thank my colleagues, Delegate Wells and Delegate Attar, for their questions, because it's very much along the lines, as you guys know, the questions that I have related to this project. And so I just want to be clear first about the statements about this bill just being about the racetrack and the authority ending at the kind of the lines that are around the racetrack. I mean, to be clear, the workforce housing is not going to be on the campus of the racetrack, right?
No, that's right.
And to my understanding, I was under the impression that that workforce housing was going to be first dedicated for workers at Pimlico.
I think that's right. We haven't worked out exactly the details.
Okay.
As to how that's going to work.
And so you would agree that that $10 million dedicated to the workforce housing is the only dollar amount in this bill that is dedicated to community development outside of Pimlico Racetrack, the lines that surround the racetrack facility?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, because I think a lot of the things that are being built at the track are being built to benefit the community. So I mean, yes, is it a dollar spent across the street? No. Is it a dollar spent to benefit the community? Yes.
So I understand that there are going to be community amenities on the site, right? The 1,000 seat event center. I hope that our community takes full advantage of that. And I look forward to having wonderful events there.
It's going to be great. You're going to be able to look out of the track with big windows on one side. It's going to be super.
But we're talking about outside the lines, right? So outside those lines, the only dollar amount that's in this facility, in this bill, is related to the workforce housing for Pimlico workers, correct?
That's right.
Okay. We talked about this industry being essentially a $3 billion industry for the state of Maryland. Is there any information that you guys have about how much of that, either direct or collateral impact on the state, actually hits the streets of Park Heights?
I don't have that. I don't have that granular detail.
Okay.
There's pretty good statistics on this, but not at that level.
Okay. In the bill, there's a provision that the comptroller has been depositing $17 million into a fund. That's the community development, actually the racing and community development financing fund. And that's on page 14 of the bill, right?
Right.
What exactly is that fund for?
That fund was for capital improvements, and it aggregates with the bonding authority to complete the projects.
So what's the community part of that fund?
I don't know why it has that name. I think it has that name because
It was the name of the original bill that passed 2 years ago, I believe it was. So they named the fund with the same name as the bill.
Okay. Where does that fund stand at this point?
I'm thinking $62 million.
Okay. And before we actually,
but I say that with all caveats attached.
Okay. My understanding from the bill is that that fund is designed to service any potential debt after the bonds are issued. Is that correct?
Correct. And the money that accumulated before is rolled in, and otherwise we'd be back asking for $480 million of bonding authority.
Okay. Is it your understanding that these bonds will have eventually debt service that will need to dedicate these funds to?
Yes, I think that's in the fiscal note.
Okay. Do you have an understanding of how much of this fund, once it reaches, essentially it'll be $100 million by the time the project is prepared?
The $17 million services the bond debt. So all of it goes towards servicing bond debt.
So it's your understanding or your belief that the $100 million that will be in that fund eventually will need to be all used for debt service?
It's either or capital. So the cash that has accrued gets added to the bonding authority to build the facilities
Okay.
and professionals.
If all of that money is not needed for bond servicing, for servicing the debt, is it possible that that money could then be used for the community so that, as we stated, we can have concurrent development of the community around this redevelopment of Pimlico?
All the bonding money is going to be needed to service the debt.
But I thought you just said that it also could be used for capital.
No, so the cash that's accumulated gets added to the amount of the bonding authority. That's what builds the projects. $17 million on a going forward basis services the debt, provides debt service on the bonds.
But there's a provision in there that says if the bonds do not need, if this $17 million fund per year does not need to be used for service of the debt, it reverts back into this racing and community development fund, correct?
Right. There won't be any because we're stretched as far as we can go.
Okay. My other question is about the intent of the bill as far as where Preakness is run in 2025. It's my understanding from the bill that it's the intent of, you're asking us to make it our intent to conduct Preakness and the Black Eyed Susan in 2025 at Pimlico.
Yes.
Okay. But that's still up in the air.
I have to say a caveat because the building is in terrible condition. So actually I lost sleep last night worrying about that very issue. The Stadium Authority has told us that they can do the construction and we can run it there in 25. But the only caveats are it's in really bad shape. And if for some reason something happened, I always have to put a caveat. But what I said at the compact meeting, and I'm saying over and over, we're running the Preakness in Baltimore in 2025. That's the intent. I just don't want, so let's just put it at a higher percentage, 95%, but I always have to give myself a little bit of like something bad could happen that I can't forecast right now, but they have modeled it and they said they can do it. And by missing just the 1 year, it's not costing us any more. Before we were trying to run it there every year. And that was part of the reason the costs had been driven up. So this is what makes it workable.
Okay, my last question is this. If there is, as we say, investment in this bill that is not on the actual grounds of Pimlico, why not put in the bill what we're willing to do for the community?
I think we did by acknowledging our renewed commitment to the community compact.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions that go in a couple different directions, but I'd like to do RFRA first if we could a little bit. We have RFRA about $10 million a year. Is that right? Right now it goes in about, is that a correct number that we dedicate?
I think it's 17.2.
Okay. Can you differentiate that with the one that Delegate Ruff just talked about? They sound the same, but I think they're different, right? The RFRA versus the Racing and Community Development Financing Fund. They're not one and the same, are they?
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Racing Community Development Financing Fund is a more recently created fund that was created to catch money specifically for these redevelopment projects.
Okay, and you were quoted as saying that 17 million, well, it's debt service, but it's for capital improvement, but so is the RFRA, right?
So,
Did they support different capital projects?
no, I mean, I'm thinking about it in bigger picture, easier to understand. It's $17 million total.
Yes.
That was available for capital improvements. And to the extent the money has been unspent, that is cash that will be rolled into the project so that we're not seeking more money, more bonding authority than the 400. And the $17 million that continues to accrue annually after the construction will then be used to service the bonds. And that's the way the numbers work.
But both of those numbers essentially would be combined to support in one way or another capital improvements at the racetrack.
Correct.
Okay. And so we're talking about, a lot of talk has been done about Rosecroft having a pot of money right now in their RFRA that's unused, and it's likely they're not going to use it because they're likely not going to be with us soon. Do you know the amount that they currently have?
4.5 million.
4.5. And you say that Ocean Downs has about 7, is that right? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 million. All right. So one of the things we said is that, well, Ocean Downs, that's what they're entitled to, plus a little over $1 million a year that comes out of the RFRA for them, they're 10%. Has the Standardbred community been told or talked to about how their dependency might shift to Ocean Downs with the closure of Rosecroft and the need for some of that money to actually be shifted rather than to the Thoroughbred effort here, to some of that be shifted to the remaining Standardbred, AKA Ocean Downs?
So let me drop in a clarification for a second. The portion of Rosecroft's RFRA that's being taken here is just the RFRA. The purse dedication account, the Standardbred portion of the purse dedication account, is not touched at all by this bill. Should Rosecroft close at some point, which I think many of us have expected for a number of years that was a likelihood at some point. And I say that with great regret because I grew up in Fort Washington and Rosecroft was the first track I ever went to. The purse dedication amount money, that purse money, it still stays with Standardbreds.
Correct.
And will go to potentially to Ocean Downs. The RFRA, the portion of the RFRA that is at Rosecroft right now, a portion of it would go to help support this plan. And the justification behind that is that Rosecroft is also owned by the Stronach Group, right? So that would be investment in their property.
Okay, that's very helpful. Moving on, the agreement with Stronach is interesting because it's forever, $3 million. So what happens if, for example, we change our structure here to the agreement with Stronach? Like, let's say for some reason, hopefully not, but in 10 years, we say this needs to be reorganized. What happens to our agreement with them? Do we have to pay them? Do we continue to pay them $3 million?
No.
Okay, explain to me how that would terminate, in what conditions that would terminate.
State's election, we terminate. Preakness still runs in Baltimore, and it runs, for lack of a better, it runs on a Breeders' Cup model where they run the race for 2 days. They pay a rent for the facility, and it moves forward in that way. And we gave up none of the protections so that if after 10 years we decide we don't want to do it anymore, we have all the protections for the Preakness being run in Baltimore and in the state of Maryland that we have today. I think you can view it essentially as an option.
We just revert to the current arrangement then.
We revert to the current
Where it's
arrangement,
their track and they run it.
but not day to day, just those 2 days.
Right.
They would run just those 2 days.
And just a curiosity, what happens to Laurel in the interim? You say we're running the Preakness there. Will they be doing a regular racing card as
Yes.
well during that time until
Yeah.
such a time as we close them down?
And we have it rent free through the end of 2027.
Okay, and we'd be running the races there as well during that
Correct.
time.
That's
Okay.
right.
And final one, this is a fun one. There were some great pictures of what Pimlico is going to look like in the last iteration. Is it going to look anything like that? Is that pretty much what we're going with, or is it?
Well, no, the community is going to have to weigh in. There'll have to be some designs. I have spoken to the architects about it. They have some thoughts that sort of that have a Baltimore tie, and there were some drawings I saw from years ago that I particularly like. But that's going to be. You don't want to get into everybody's aesthetics because then you'll lose votes.
So no artist renditions yet.
No artist renditions yet.
Got it.
No, sir.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the work you're doing. Everybody
Thank
else says that, and I'm in cahoots with them on that.
Thank you.
Delegate Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Delegate Denise Roberts, representing District 25 in Prince George's County. And so I'm the only one on the committee from Prince George's County. However, I'm not the only one in the room from Prince George's County. And so I want to divert your attention back to the $1.2 million that you're stripping from Prince George's County. Some of those funds are attached to community funds, specifically $125,000 for Forest Heights. Will Forest Heights continue to be able to receive those funds?
I believe the Forest Heights money, isn't that what's connected to the MGM local impact aid? Or am I mixing up my funds?
So that's local impact from casinos. That was tied to MGM.
Okay, are there any monies from the 1.2 million that were connected to the surrounding community? Okay, and then what happens to Rosecroft? Since you're not gonna be making any investments there?
Stronach Group had made the decision not to make, I don't want to speak for them, but they hadn't made any, they were not making any investments there. And I think it'll be up to them with what they do with that property, because it'll be owned by the Stronach Group, not by the state.
So the Stronach Group is going to purchase?
The Stronach Group is the landowner. They own Rosecroft Raceway right now and, you know, the property generally. You know, my understanding is that they've been thinking for a number of years about the future disposition of that property. I think there is a conversation that would need to happen, like with any landowner, between the Stronach Group and the county and the community about the highest and best use of that facility. They could continue. There's nothing in this bill that would prevent them from continuing to run Standardbred racing there if they so chose. But Rosecroft could also be put to additional uses.
And if
Delegate Roberts, I also think it's my understanding that Rosecroft is going to remain open until the Stronach Group gets an offer for the property.
So if there is a new buyer, and since that would be the case, if there is a new buyer, would there be any consideration to reallocate some funds back to Rosecroft?
If the Stronach Group chose to sell Rosecroft to another owner, that would be a future policy decision by the legislature.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Harton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think we ate a whole barrel of apples today. Some people had many bites, but there's still a few questions left. I represent the district that has Ocean Downs. So not being, having a huge understanding of horse racing, I remember in my 20s going to the infield. It was a great time. I remember many races at Ocean Downs. Two different things. What's healthier, the thoroughbred industry or the standardbred? As a whole, like as a industry in Maryland, what's healthier?
Here in what sense?
Just being prosperous and being able to sustain itself in longevity in the future.
I would just say that's a challenging. I think all racing has faced challenges as consumers have chosen different ways of spending their entertainment dollars over the years. I think the significant difference right now between thoroughbred and standardbred racing is that the only track in Maryland that has a full casino at it is Ocean Downs. That and frankly, what I would argue has been very good management by the ownership there. And very good work by the standardbred owners themselves has made Ocean Downs a very successful facility. So that facility is clearly very stable and will be for a very long time. And it's a jewel of the lower shore, frankly.
So thinking about the standardbred industry and sort of what Delegate Roberts said, suppose Rosecroft is sold and somebody wants to put money into it. We're stripping all that money away from the industry. And as we know, if Rosecroft does close, Ocean Downs then is going to be picking up some of the for loss of some races. There's going to be more pressure on them, and it seems like we're doing math that's very split. You know, there was a 20% split in the in the 80-20. Now we're going 90-10 in the allocation, but we're not going to lose half the standardbred industry because Ocean Downs is going to have more than that.
So Ocean Downs is going, that's why we've got a financial consultant. Ocean Downs is actually going to benefit, right? If they close Rosecroft, all the VLT revenues that are now go to Rosecroft to subsidize purses at Rosecroft are going to be redirected to Ocean Downs. We're not touching it. The only thing that we're touching is physical improvement money. So physical improvement money that was not spent on matching funds by Stronach Group at Rosecroft, which the Stronach Group has consented to be redirected to Laurel, that's the only thing that's moving. But Ocean Downs will actually be getting increased purse money if Rosecroft closes.
Okay, and someone asked the question, have you talked to the folks at Ocean Downs? You talk about they would have to spend 14 million to use their RFRA.
To use all the RFRA.
Right, you did have to spend 14 million. Has anybody talked to them? And this question wasn't answered the last time. Has anybody talked to them to see what improvements would be needed for them to take on the additional racing days and carry Standardbred racing for the state of Maryland?
We have, no, because they're available to spend that $7 million as they will, and we don't control it. And so there's nothing limiting their ability to spend the $7 million now.
I understand now, but we're talking about them being.
But they're not going to lose any of their RFRA either. The only RFRA funds that are being redirected are monies that were matching at Rosecroft and could only be spent at Rosecroft. So they stand to get a significant increase in VLT monies redirected to them that were otherwise at Rosecroft. And the RFRA funds that are accruing for the track at Ocean Downs won't be changed.
This kind of, for an analogy, this reminds me of something you see on TV where they think Pop's dying and everybody's fighting for the money. But, you know, we don't know that Rosecroft is going away. It could be sold. But we do know if it does close, the industry is still going to exist in Maryland. And we're taking money from the industry meaning the Standardbred industry, and moving it to the Thoroughbred industry. But the burden, if we want Standardbred to be alive in Maryland, we're taking away funds from it. I understand BLT money is going to them, but maintenance funds. And no one's had a conversation with them to say, hey, for you to showcase Standardbred racing in Maryland, what do we need to do? Because I think a few years ago, RFCA money was taken from Rosecroft already, correct? 2 years ago, there was 5 or 6 million or so taken from there.
I don't think so.
I don't recall.
I see people in the back shaking their heads, so we'll ask that question later. So we've already taken that money from Rosecroft, and then the Rosecroft money that was meant for the Standardbred industry is now being taken away. It seems like we're taking a lot from that one industry and no consideration to the folks who are going to be showcasing that for Maryland, assuming that there's one racetrack's gone, take away 10% of the money, but their burden is going to increase without a doubt. Wouldn't you think?
I think unless they're going to significantly increase their race days at Ocean Downs, they're going to be swimming in VLT money, because there's an awful lot of VLT money that's going to be going to Ocean Downs, and the only thing that this is proposing to do is to take away money that was dedicated to improving Rosecroft, that wasn't spent to improve Rosecroft and is never going to be spent to improve Rosecroft. So that's the only thing that we're doing. I really, I'm disappointed that I find myself in the middle of a Standardbred, Thoroughbred. Seems to be a little tug of war, because that wasn't our intent. But we're not trying to hurt Ocean Downs in any way. And my understanding, although I haven't looked at it in detail, is that there will be a significant bump, in VLT revenues redirected to Ocean Downs if Rosecroft were to close.
I share your concern. I'm disappointed that the racetrack that's in my district wasn't consulted with to see what they would need, and people were just stealing money from the industry. And I feel that, and I'm happy to have it in my district, the Standardbred industry by itself, but disappointed equally to say that nobody talked to them to say how much has to be done to make this happen. You know, so I'll leave it at that. And then
Delegate, with respect, the authority that was created is the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority. They were charged by the legislature with creating a plan for the tracks. If there's concerns about that plans, that's why there's a bill in front of the legislature, and we're happy to talk it through with you. But it's a proposal. It's not stealing money. It's a proposal. And a proposal that, you know, I think the authority is happy to discuss, but they were not given the charge of overseeing plans around the Standardbred industry in the same way that they were given the charge of overseeing plans in the Thoroughbred industry.
I understand. It's just, we're doing simple math, splitting 50-50, and we'll have that conversation. I appreciate the offer and the opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your patience as we plow through this. A number of my questions have already been asked and answered, but I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So this is putting the state in an ongoing indefinite business relationship with Stronach.
No,
Correct? It's not.
just a license fee. There's no strings. State runs it all.
Okay, so the license, but the licensing fee is an ongoing
That's
requirement.
Yes.
Okay. And I think I heard you say earlier that should the state decide that we no longer want to be operating the race, then Stronach would continue to run the race, basically renting the facility from the state. Is that?
Stronach, or if they had someone else.
Or
who
whoever
owned it.
they've transferred it to. Okay. And then would the state be compensated for that?
Yes,
Okay, is that part of the terms of the deal?
yes.
What do we get in that scenario?
We get a rental payment plus a percentage of gross revenues to be modeled off of the then Breeders' Cup contract.
Got it. Okay, okay. And then what happens to the Maryland Jockey Club? We see what happens to their memorabilia. We see what you mentioned, what happens to their employees.
The name Maryland Jockey Club, which is the oldest name in sports, it's
Right.
the oldest sport, transferring to the state of Maryland. It's going to be the
Okay.
new name of the 501c4.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I think I heard you say earlier, basically that this nonprofit model will be successful because essentially with the state's investment, this becomes profitable, but not profitable enough to entice the private investment. Is that
That's
accurate?
right.
Okay.
That's right.
So how, what does that profit, that ongoing revenue stream look like, and what happens to it? Is it all folded back into operating and sort of growing the racing, or
Well, and
how else would it?
And we're going to have to set aside funds to maintain the capital, right? We don't want to run down
Right.
the tracks and be back here in 70 years, although I won't be here to weather the storm.
Neither will I.
So the money will be held in the industry. And we haven't worked out the mechanics. At Del Mar, they upstream the money to the MTROA equivalent, which holds the money. The way this will work is the state will own the land and enter into a ground lease with the subsidiary, and the ground lease will ensure that the subsidiary, what will be the new Maryland Jockey Club,
Okay,
is operating within the parameters that the state wants to see for the operations. That's the
Okay.
way it'll work. And usually I think and then the money should be upstreamed. I think that's the way it's going to work out, although we have not gotten there yet. And the money will be held probably at the MTROA level or successor entity, because this is just a temporary vehicle. It'll have to be folded into something else and
is
after
there
sunset.
is there any opportunity for some portion of that to feed back into the community?
At this point, it's a break-even operation with the various thin margins. So I think that's something that we could revisit in years down the road. But right now, we want to make sure that we don't lose money, so that I honor my word and we're not coming back here asking for a dime.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the panel. It's a long afternoon for this one. So one question about the profit side. And you said there's like certain percentage come to the state, or the revenue, or the profit side, or is it the revenue side? Earlier you talked about like the state will be share some, like the MTROC will share some profit with the state. Is that right? When you make a profit?
No, I don't think what I think I said was that now the state will retain all profits from the Preakness, as opposed to a third-party operator. Under prior incarnations, we were making the investment. A third party was owning the track and owning the race. And to the extent they profited, all that money went to the third party property owner. Under this approach, any money that's profited from that will go to the state and be retained by the state. When I say the state, I'm saying the MTROA and the operating entity.
But it's not the state, right? It's MTROC, right?
It's the MTROA, yes.
Okay, MTROA.
So it's being plowed back into the industry.
I see. But that money will not come back to the state revenue, right?
It comes back, it is kept by, because we're a state agency. So it's kept by a state agency rather than being paid with profiting a private owner.
I see. And then I look at the share of the revenue, how do we spend? Some of it actually go to blueprint, right? So I think that page like 20 something. I'm wondering because one side we put a huge investment there, but the other side we want to make sure the business will be successful that you described earlier. And I just wonder, like, once the business will be successful, how much like, the state can benefit from that? Like, especially think about how the redistribution of the profit.
I think it's too early to forecast how, hopefully,
Mhm.
we're in such a great situation that we have a windfall of money down the road and we can have that discussion. But right now, the way it should work is that we will run profitably and we will set aside money to deal with capital improvements going forward. And we'll have money to reinvest, for example, in like Rosecroft, which came up, or not Rosecroft, but Bear Hill that came earlier on for a turf facility. But we don't know yet what those numbers are. What I can tell you is that based upon the books we have, the racing days we're going to run and what the costs are at Laurel, that we will run profitably at Laurel. And then we'll have separate financial models once we get back and see what the Preakness looks like. I have forecasts, but that's 4 years out and we don't have a detailed plan for the facility yet.
I see. Thank you very much.
Delegate Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First and foremost for bringing the bill, but also thank you to my colleagues from the 40th and 41st District for what you all have shared today and the questions you've asked. I mean, this is very important to us all in Baltimore City. I represent East Baltimore. My colleague Delegate Smith is in the back as well, our chair of our delegation. So like we've all shown up for this. And in my experience, I started in this legislature in 2013 as an intern. And I believe it was in 2013 when one of these proposals was brought to the table and approved. But we're here again.
That
so I want
was
to
the 10-year plan he referred to earlier.
There you go. So, you know, just urging, you all articulated this commitment, but just really want to urge that commitment. I think my colleagues in the 41st have made it clear that they have heard this over and over again, and me in East Baltimore have heard the same thing over and over again. And we really do want to see that progress. I talk about that progress because I think it was based on some of those commitments that we see some of the other progress that's happening in Northwest Baltimore. I'm thinking about the rec centers, CC Jackson, Tawanda, the new library that's getting ready to get built. A lot of these projects have been developing as a result of what we know and have been anticipating from Pimlico, but we just haven't seen it manifest at Pimlico. So just doubling down on that piece real quick. But my question specifically goes to LifeBridge, and I know none of you represent LifeBridge. Oh, I also want to just recognize also Mr. Brody, my constituent. Good to see you. Good to see you. But thinking about LifeBridge, back at that 10-year plan, LifeBridge, I think, was talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in investments that was going to be coming to Northwest Baltimore. I think they had already been in first phase of it, which I think was 100 million at that point. So my question is, with regard to where they are, if you all have any sense of that, as an anchor institution over there, what is the conversation between the two, between what's going on here and what they had talked about? Is that still going on? Is it changed? I just don't have a sense of that.
We have to sit down and have a conversation with LifeBridge. We have not done that. We have mutual representation, so I have a general sense they know what we're doing, but we have to have a conversation with them because even with respect to the land that they own around the track, there needs to be a discussion about how that is worked out. And the parking garage piece needs to be worked out, and Medco needs to be at the table. And I loop back to, we only had 9 months. So I sort of knew what was possible with the hospital generally, but they're going to have a big seat at the table in terms of what works for them and how this works together. And we have to do that. We have to get going on that conversation in the next few months.
Yeah, I think that's a critical piece. And then the second and last question, doubling down on the community impact. You talked about the community compact that was previously signed and how that's kind of going to be a guiding light on that piece. Can you just give us a high level on what some of the goals that exist from that previous plan? What do those look like? I just don't think that the committee as a whole has a good sense of that. And it seems like some of my colleagues in the 41st District would love to see, you know, what that looks like in more detail. So what are the high level principles that guide some of the decision making with that group?
I think the biggest principle, and Mark maybe will speak to this too, but is there 13 neighborhoods as part of There are 13 neighborhoods that are signed onto the community compact. It was signed by the then mayor. It was signed by, I believe the Stadium Authority signed it, the governor signed it. And it was a seat at the table for communication and consultation with respect to everything that happens at the site and everything that happens around the site. There were stated goals. Many of the goals, we actually are picking up on more of the goals, because at the time, you know, there was a contemplation that they were just building essentially an event pavilion that would host a Preakness meet for 2 weeks, and the rest of it would sit vacant, and then there'd be some ball fields in the middle of the track, and that's all it was.
Right.
Right. So, you know, we're coming back with 365 days of economic activity, something that's really going to have not just, forget horse racing for a minute, but weddings and proms and reinvigorate the site. I did not know that the Preakness used to be years ago the home of most of the proms in Baltimore City, and there's no reason that can't happen at Preakness Pimlico. There's no reason that that can't happen again. But so, you know, the Pimlico Compact just talks about a shared commitment and having everybody see and sort of the community's espoused goals. And as I read it, and then I looked at our plan, and then I reread it, and we've been meeting with the compact. And I think that everything that we're proposing is consistent with that. And we have some members here who will be testifying later if you all stop grilling me.
Not yet. There's still, I count 6 members of the committee haven't asked a question.
I'm happy to sit here all night. That wasn't nice. So, you know, I think that we're meeting those goals, but look, it's a process, and as I said, Mr. Brody and I show up every month and keep having the conversations and get out and tour the community and talk to them about ideas and the way that we can improve it. I mean, I mentioned a small one, but incorporating a more flexible use event place on site that would be more community friendly, that's more turnkey, and you don't have to pay a lot of money for. You know, that's the kind of thing that they were anticipating, but also what the streets around the site look like. And that's a conversation with the city. You know, can we make better walkways? Can we make it better lit? How does all that going to work out? And that's all, I don't want to say TBD, we've planned a lot, but you know, the community has to have a seat at the table for all of this. And that's our commitment.
And what investments are we making to support improvements to the housing stock, facade improvements, helping seniors that may not have money to put into their homes, invest in their homes and build out better living spaces, investing in small businesses. That's all part of the larger DHCD strategy that's embodied in the budget this year. But that's on DHCD's mind, on our mind as an administration as well.
Yeah, and to Delegate Wells' point, you know, Park Heights is going to be all right. They've got so much going on already. We're just hoping to be additive. Their leadership has capacity. They've got planning. They've got strategy that's been ongoing for decade plus, and we're just going to be additive to that. So that's the goal.
So just to conclude, Madam Chair, you know, I spent my summers in Park Heights from East Baltimore, but my father was on Haywood and Buford. And that site has always been very dormant. So we're just really eager to see y'all really bring this to real life and to fruition. So just encouraging y'all to keep pushing and thank y'all for bringing this proposal.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a real quick question. If this moves the way we're talking about, will it have any adverse effects on Tremonti Racetrack?
No, not changing anything.
Thank you.
Final question, because you have, unfortunately, as you're sitting up here, first of all, thank you. It's been over an hour, so appreciate that. Caught in this kind of standardbred versus thoroughbred battle, I guess, for money. But just to clarify for the committee, especially for new members, so under this agreement, Ocean Downs would still get their RFRA money, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And if Rosecroft closes, they would get that VLT money, is that correct?
All of it.
All of it. And last year, this body passed legislation that made it permanent, because it was a sunset on it, but it made it permanent, that Ocean Downs gets approximately 1.4 million from their purses to use for their operating expenses, which is about 30 grand a race, which could go higher if they raced more days. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much for sitting there for that long. We have one more favorable. Justin Williams, please.
Thank you all for your time,
Madam Chair.
Thank you. You're in luck because the committee's probably all out of questions.
Perfect timing. I'll be brief. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Justin Williams, Deputy Mayor for Community and Economic Development in Baltimore City. I'm here on behalf of the Mayor of the vibrant city to testify in support of HB 1524, which will catalyze the redevelopment of Pimlico racetrack, an initiative that promises not only to revitalize a historic landmark, but to invigorate the heart and soul of Park Heights and the surrounding neighborhoods. Mayor Scott's personal journey growing up in Park Heights, as everyone's been name checking today, during the 1980s, amidst the challenges of white flight, industrial decline, and an upsurge in violence, mirrors the resilience and undying spirit of the community. This narrative is not just Mayor Scott's, it's the story of countless Baltimoreans who have seen their neighborhood evolve, for better or worse. The storied history of Park Heights Racetrack, as the nation's second oldest racetrack, is a testament to our city's rich cultural heritage. Legendary horses like Man of War, Seabiscuit, Secretariat have galloped across its grounds, etching their names across the annals of history. But yet, as many people have already alluded to in recent times, this iconic institution has suffered from disinvestment, echoing the broader struggles of the surrounding community. However, the tide is turning. The proposed legislation focused on Pimlico Racetrack itself is not just about preserving the historic venue or retaining Preakness in Baltimore. It's about breathing new life into the community with the promise of 140 to 165 racing days a year, a potential hotel, and other amenities. It's a beacon of hope for economic revival and community development. And as has been alluded to already, there's the area has been on the cusp of a transformative area. We're starting to leverage the developments seen in the Park Heights master plan adopted nearly 2 decades ago. In our written testimony, we listed projects that are on the way or coming that have hundreds of affordable units. The first single family detached homes in 20 years, new Park Heights library, investment, expansion of 2 21st century schools. These developments are not just buildings and infrastructure, they are the foundation of a renewed and vibrant community. Just in closing, we just are also deeply encouraged by the inclusion in the legislation that recognizes the Pimlico Redevelopment Community Compact. This acknowledgement is crucial as we collaborate with the Stadium Authority and the MTROA to ensure that the newly developed Pimlico delivers the tangible benefits to our neighborhoods and maximizes the economic impact on Park Heights and beyond. So in conclusion, on behalf of the mayor, I urge the committee to deliver a favorable report on this transformative legislation and for the future of our community, our children, and our generations to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Delegate Wells?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you. So, because we heard from the previous panel that it would change hands to a nonprofit. So I'm wondering, will there be any revenue loss by it switching to a nonprofit?
The fiscal note referenced some potential loss to the city in terms of transfer tax and recordation tax. My understanding of it, without digging into the numbers, was that, I mean, in theory, if the track weren't redeveloped at all, then we wouldn't be receiving the transfer tax and recordation tax anyway. And I guess the sales and use tax goes to the state. So I think that was the only specific tax revenue loss, but we think that the economic development and impact that will catalyze.
So you're just saying that whatever potential loss would be outweighed by revenue, by gain.
Right. And
Do you guys have a number?
I have not reported, I did not see the number. I mean, we're pleased to see all the catalytic development in the Park Heights area with impact investment area work that we're doing. And then the others work with state DHCD to invest more in the community.
Could you provide us with a number or like at least what those numbers do look like?
The economic development impact.
Not right now, but I mean, offline, could you provide that to the committee, what those numbers look like?
The
projected loss, but then the revenue gain.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we have the unfavorables, Jackie McLeod, Jonathan Roberts, Bobby Jones, and Michael Hall. And we could just start with the gentleman to my right. Sir, you can kick it off and then we'll just work our way down. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Jackie McLeod, President of the Maryland Standardbred Breeders Association. I live in Anne Arundel, Maryland. I have a horse farm, 25 acres, breeding farm, training facility, and I also drive and race horses. Respectfully, with the Maryland Standardbred Breeders Association, the HB 1524, because it seeks to divert racetrack facility renewal account funds from the standardbred industry. For the past 25 years, I've lived in this facility, in this 25 acres farm in Anne Arundel County. A couple of months ago, the Maryland Horse Council touted the American Horse Council National Economic Survey, which noted that in Maryland, the standardbred horse racing industry is a 284 million impact on the Maryland economy. That dribbles all down through all the enterprise of the vendors, everything that goes on. Coming out of the pandemic, the last 2 years, we've had with a stake program at Rosecroft and at Ocean City, we had established 8 new stake and track records, which was very impressive with the breeding industry at this time. People are a little shaky right now in the breeding ordeal, that they have their hope that losing the reefer money, the incentive that if it's not going to go to the facility, if Rosecroft does close, that the incentive of breeding would really hurt, because they have a lot to pick up to keep the breeding industry alive. There's an important service to the standardbred racing industry, that the minimal amount that we get of the REFA is such a small amount, but such a racing in the survival of the breeding. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Bobby Jones. I'm the General Manager at Ocean Downs Racetrack and Casino. For those of you that don't know, we're on the eastern shore of Maryland, about 6 miles from the boardwalk, right next to Ocean Pines on 589. We first opened in 1949. We've been racing about 48 races every summer. We are a large tourist attraction. People bring their kids and their grandkids, and you probably hear stories like kind of like you talked about, where you go to the track. So it's a large attraction for our area. We have about 1,200 people a night that come to our races. I'm here today in opposition of HB 1524. This legislation reallocates the Racetrack Facility Renewal Matching Fund, known as RIFA monies, from the Standardbreds to the Thoroughbreds, proposed Pimlico Plus plan. As you know, the RIFA account is a matching account fund that is a part of the original legislation authorizing slots in Maryland. The purpose of the fund is to promote racetrack capital improvements. Currently, the Thoroughbreds receive 80% and the Standardbreds receive 20%. This bill will permanently reduce the Standardbred profit portion of this from the RIFA monies to 10%. Last year, Rosecroft Racetrack or Raceway, the only other standardbred track in Maryland, was under contract to be sold. At that time, we gathered an emergency meeting with our standardbred horsemen and signed an agreement that if Rosecroft Raceway closes, we'd be adding additional races, which would extend our meet into the winter, which is not common for us. We usually end by September. We will need the standardbred RIFA matching funds to winterize our racing infrastructure. We've used the RIFA matching fund for many important capital improvements on our track. In order to receive the matching fund, we must first extend our money to apply to the Racing Commission for our reimbursement. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Roberts. I'm president of the Cloverleaf Standardbred Owners Association. Our organization represents all the owners, trainers, and drivers in the standardbred industry within the state of Maryland. I'm here today to oppose House Bill 1524 because it seeks to divert funds from the standardbred horse racing industry to the thoroughbred horse racing industry. While I appreciate and respect the efforts made by the state of Maryland and the Maryland Thoroughbred Racing Authority to save the Preakness, a race I've watched my entire life, and thoroughbred racing, I'm extremely disheartened that you would do this at the expense of standardbred racing. Standardbred Racing receives 20% of the RIFRA money currently dedicated to the state's two Standardbred tracks, Rosecroft Raceway in Prince George's County and Ocean Downs in Worcester County. RIFRA is funded by 1% of the VLT monies. With the help of these funds, Standardbred Racing is able to generate a $284 million impact on Maryland's economy, per the American Horse Council's economic survey and touted by the Maryland Horse Council. The same survey noted that the thoroughbred industry creates a $591 million impact on Maryland's economy, an impact only slightly double that of the Standardbreds at a cost of more than quadruple to the state, which includes 80% of the current RIFRA monies allotted to thoroughbred racing. Standardbred racing is flourishing in Maryland with a record high handles in 2023. Stripping Standardbred racing of their total RIFRA allocation would be catastrophic to the industry, as well as injure the economic health of Prince George's and Worcester counties due to potential loss of tax basis and job opportunities. As such, I would ask each of you to consider, why would you vote to cause injury to an industry that currently generates an economic impact of $284 million and provides community outreach as well as additional economic injury under this bill to Prince George's County? Please consider opposing House Bill 1524 or passing House Bill 1524, striking all the language that siphons from Standardbred racing and all the positive economic benefits and community outreach that it creates. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Michael Hall. I both breed, race, and train Standardbreds in the state of Maryland. I grew up in Prince George's County, right, not too far from Rosecroft. Now I live in Worcester County, so both of the tracks are very close to me. Yeah, half of what I had to say, I don't need to say. You guys asked the right question. You know, ultimately, if you take away half the money that's provided to us, it was originally split 80-20. We found a way to make it work. If you split it again, I don't know if we can find a way to make it work. You know, and to assume Rosecroft's going to close, I'm going there tonight to race. So is Jonathan. I mean, that's where we make our living. You know, it's 60 days out of 108 live race days. 60 of them are still at Rosecroft. So to listen to Mr. Cross, who I'm sure is very good at his job, talk as if Rosecroft's already closed, it's very disheartening. You know, that's not what I plan on hearing. So 3/4 of what I would say doesn't matter. Bottom line is they take that money away, you probably kill the Standardbred industry.
Do you have questions, Delegate Eversole?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the two racers over there. If Rosecroft were to close, would you need to depend more heavily on Ocean Downs for racing? In other words, you do a certain amount of racing at Rosecroft, you just probably do, I'm guessing, a certain amount at Ocean Downs. Would you probably need to shift some of that to remain viable, if you know, to Ocean Downs? In other words, you'd be dependent on them for that in the absence of Rosecroft.
Absolutely. We already have an agreement with Ocean Downs in place that if Rosecroft closes, they will pick up additional race days. Right now, it's split roughly 60 days at Rosecroft and 48 days at Ocean Downs. They would take those days, which then the purse monies would go over to Ocean Downs, but that doesn't actually go to Ocean Downs. That's the purse money that we race for. So, and the RIFRA money, you know, is used for capital improvements, which, you know, to be honest, Ocean Downs is a summertime facility. It has an outdoor paddock, outdoor everything, which is fine for the summertime. It works out great. But if we're going to switch over and race to a race in the wintertime there as well, it would require some serious capital improvements there. And they're aware of that and willing to do those.
And it's the RIFRA money that's in question here. So I'm going to turn to Bobby Jones. And so you have about 7 million saved up right now. Presumably you're saving for a cold day, let's say, another possible, but not 4.1 million. So we're talking about $11.5 million that would be available if indeed the Rosecroft money were to shift to you. Do you have a good $22 million project that you're thinking about right now?
Not necessarily a $22 million project. I mean, obviously, if Rosecroft does close, we will need funds to winterize the property. So the racetrack and the barns and the paddock all are equipped for the winter season, as we know, as cold and windy as it can be. You know, we have looked at potential, you know, we have in our racing capital. We're discussing having a look at what we can possibly do to expand upon our clubhouse and what that would look like in the future, which would be a large investment.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that as well? So the other thing that both of them sort of alluded to, but certainly is true. If we were to pick up race days past, say, March 15th going into the winter or October 15th going into the fall, you know, that facilities money, that's literally what it's for. You know, it may be redirected from Rosecroft Standardbred Industry to Ocean Standardbred Industry, but if we're going to carry the 60 race days, the majority of the race days that leave Rosecroft, ideally Rosecroft never closes and none of this matters. You're still going to handicap them, you know, from trying to be able to conduct business. But if that money did need to move to Ocean Downs, taking it away just makes it that much more difficult. We'll end up coming to you guys hoping that you can give us some kind of grant or some kind of bond. And to say that, you know, they probably could spend 17 million, that's doubtful. I mean, the Thoroughbreds are spending 275 million at Pimlico. I don't think 17 is that much.
Okay, Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here. So help me understand, 60 days and 48, 108 days. If Rosecroft closes and it's all Ocean Downs, would we run 108 days of racing there, or would there be some loss to that?
I think there were a few days that were lost, I believe.
About 38.
Yeah.
We can account for 70 with the weather and the seasons that we have. We could eventually count. The only way we could count for 108 is to improve the facility. You know, it runs into a
So
uh,
similar
obviously, you know, even with on the thoroughbred side, race days are very important to us. You know, they put a precedent on racing year round as well, and we do the exact same thing on our side. So any loss of race days, our first plan is to maintain our 2 racetracks that are currently in the state of Maryland. Barring that, if that's out of our control, we would have to switch over to Ocean Downs, which would probably mean some loss of race days, whatever percentage that might be.
So I'm excited to hear about year-round racing because, as you and I both know, coming from District 38C, Worcester County, year-round jobs are not very easy to find. So to hear that this could increase to year-round, so what would the calendar look like right now? What's ran at Ocean Downs, and then what would it look like if this merged?
So currently we start Memorial Day weekend and run through just right after Labor Day. I believe when this was going on with the potential sale of Rosecroft, they were starting in March and then going through October is my understanding.
And that was with no facility change, you know,
Right.
in the event that the facilities could be, because I mean, the pipes will freeze before and after that.
Right.
But if there was a ship-in paddock, which is what the other major difference between Standardbreds and Thoroughbreds, like where you've got to work on $115 million training center. Jonathan's parents have a training center in Southern Maryland. You know, I'm on a training center in the Eastern Shore. You know, most of us, the racetracks have already stopped having barn areas, you know, so it makes up for a lot of extra open space. There's Windback Farm that's the largest breeder of Standardbreds. Like there's a lot of open space associated with our industry. But realistically, that means we've already shifted to shipping into, say, Pimlico in that model. We just ship into the track, we race, we go back where we started from. The problem is that building needs to include stalls that can be, you know, prepared, cleaned up afterward, and then the actual stalls that we race out of. That comes at a cost. I mean, that was the model Pennsylvania used when they got slots. Probably a similar model to what we'd have to do at Ocean Downs. The cost of that, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully we can get some kind of study to figure that out.
And hearing the conversation of merging the RIFRA from Ocean Downs and Rosecroft sounds, I mean, to me, that's the fair thing to do because it keeps money in an industry. It's not stripping money from one industry to another. And you heard Mr. Lukey from the governor's office say, look, we don't mean to offend anybody, any industry or any particular building. You know, we're happy to have a conversation. So with that invitation from him, how long would it take you to come up with a serious estimate as to what it would cost to make the improvements, to make the 108 days or whatever it is that you desire possible at Ocean Downs?
It's way above me. So I would have, I'm not in the building world. So I would definitely have to reach out to our corporate office and we would have to put something together there and at our property.
Okay, I don't know how much time we have, so time may not be on your side, but I'd like the way the conversation's going. Thank you for being here and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 1524. Delegate Rosenberg, House Bill 1416. And Lisa Boudleau and Troy Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Here to speak first on behalf of House Bill 1416, which I have introduced with my colleagues, Delegate Attar and Delegate Ruff from the 41st District, which has been cross-filed by Senator Carter. Also want to speak about the value of thoroughbred racing to Pimlico, to the state, and to the surrounding community, and the benefits of the legislation we've just heard. There are two principal objectives to our bill. One is a commitment to community input in the process of decision-making regarding what's going to be built on the track site, how it will affect the surrounding neighborhoods, and what will be invested in those surrounding neighborhoods. Section 6 of the authority bill fully addresses that by adding language saying that the community compact, which has been in existence for over 4 years now, preceded by informal conversations among all the neighborhoods on all sides of the track, that there will be continued consultation with that entity, with the community compact. There was an emergency meeting just last night to discuss the legislation. And as I can confirm Mr. Cross's testimony, he has a very good attendance record. And not just there, he participates. And same thing for Malcolm, for Mr. Brody, and as well for Malcolm Ruff and my colleague, Delegate Attar, Dahlia Attar. So that concern has been addressed, and we very much appreciate the responsiveness of the authority in doing that. And that is a key part of what we're about. And Pastor Randall, the chair of the Community Compact, is here with us today to speak to the bill. The other concern we have is about, as you've heard, is about the investment, public investment that has begun, as has been pointed out, in the surrounding neighborhoods, but needs to continue. And my experience here tells me that this bill that we've introduced and the discussions that have preceded today have made it clear to the second floor, to the Moore administration, something that they already were going to do. We now have, I've been saying for months, we now have a governor who cares about the racing industry and cares about Park Heights. And we had a meeting this morning with Secretary Day of the Department of Housing and Community Development, and his letter of commitment regarding an ongoing process with all of the neighborhoods has been promised by the end of business today. And of course, we will share that with this committee as soon as we see it, as soon as we receive it. As has been pointed out, there's already a significant amount of investment, public investment in Park Heights. There are, Lisa Budlow from CHI can speak to greater specificity. There are two buildings that they have completed at Park Heights in Woodland, and literally across the street, Henson Development has broken ground on a multifaceted housing project. There will be a new library, as Delegate Young pointed out, the first in decades, actually replacing the library literally was across the street, the library that I used growing up in the Park Heights area. There was reference to Pastor Gaines, for whose responsibility, for whom there are discussions about the housing for employee housing for people working at the track. He has already has one proposal that's been funded in part by the city, state, and federal dollars on Belvedere. And the workforce housing would be part of a proposal that he has put forward for Belvedere, pretty much the length of the track. Wherever you sit, not counting the infield, but even in the infield, you will see Belvedere, and you will see the difference in the investment. When investment is made there, you'll see that when you go to the track, and that will have a beneficial effect on all parties. Let me conclude by making this point about the racetrack and about the Preakness. As enthusiastic as we are about the upcoming Oriole season, there is no guarantee that the second game of the World Series will be played at Camden Yards. We do have a guarantee, if we keep it, that the Preakness, the second jewel of the Triple Crown, will continue to be played, continue to be run at Pimlico with this investment. And let me conclude. I think there are many Marylanders who have their own story about Pimlico and what it's meant to them over their lives. I would offer this one. I was a student at Pimlico Junior High, located on Northern Parkway, a stone's throw from the racetrack. Northern Parkway, which at the time was a real dividing line between communities. I had a friend from elementary school who was in my class still at Pimlico, and he lived across the street from the racetrack. Jay Slater lived at Rogers and Merville at the top of the stretch, and we would watch the races from his attic. Sometimes we'd go up on the roof. And this one Friday afternoon in the fall, when we were in the 8th grade in 1963, I was not yet a delegate. We left Pimlico to go to the track, to go to his house. And in the middle of the afternoon, we saw people walking out of the track. And we asked them what had happened. The president was shot. It was November 22nd. And we were in Jay's house with his immigrant father, who owned Slater's Grocery in Park Heights and Belvedere, part of the commercial area that would be redeveloped by what we're asking you as the committee to get the ball rolling to undertake. And we were in the TV room with Jay's father, his immigrant father, when Cronkite took his glasses off and said, "It's 1 o'clock standard time. President Kennedy officially is dead." I say that story because President Kennedy also said that defeat is an orphan. Victory has 1,000 fathers. And it is my firm belief that what's being proposed today will be victory for 1,000 people or more who hold $2 win tickets on the favorite, people who work in the racing industry, and most important, to all the people on all sides of Northern Parkway who live around Pimlico Racetrack. I urge favorable action on House Bill 1524. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. I'm Lisa Budlow, and I am the CEO of CHI. We're a nonprofit celebrating 40 years of community service to Northwest Baltimore. And I do think that this moment is among the most exciting and meaningful times in those 4 decades. So in 2019, as the first Pimlico redevelopment plan was taking shape, CHI began convening neighborhood leaders to discuss the plan. And the neighbors shared their hopes and their dreams and they shared their concerns and their worries. And many, many, many meetings later, we took all of our notes from those meetings and pulled them together into the Pimlico Community Compact that you've heard discussed here today. And the compact has 3 elements: to establish a board of neighborhood leaders that would provide input on the redevelopment, to require a plan to take care of the impact of the additional racing days at Pimlico, which is even more important now, and to ensure that the investment in the track would align with community interests and have the effect of enhancing the quality of life for neighbors all around the track. I'm thrilled to say, as you've heard, the board is meeting. The stakeholders are meeting with us, including now the authority, and we're so grateful. CHI is a community development anchor in Northwest. As Delegate Rosenberg mentioned, we've just completed 138 units of affordable housing at Woodland Gardens. We've completed a substantial renovation of 227 units, Weinberg Place on the Sinai Hospital campus. We're a founding partner of the Northwest Baltimore Partnership, and we're investing in Park Heights alongside neighbors and partners who are also investing in Park Heights. And we're here to say that we know that the racetrack redevelopment is good for Baltimore, it's good for Northwest Baltimore, and we want to ensure that it's good for all of the residents who live all around the track in Northwest Baltimore. We support the redevelopment plan that the city and the state will continue to work alongside the community to ensure that the plan will direct investment that will benefit all of the neighbors and create a win for all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. As you have been told, I'm Pastor Randall. I am the chair of the the Redevelopment Advisory Board for the redevelopment of the track and the overseer of the infamous Community Compact. Our idea is in that compact that our residents will have a voice. Our idea in that compact is that you would hear us, the city would hear us, the mayor, the governor will hear us, and that nothing would go forward in our Park Heights until we have all been heard. And we have really been in a position to thank a board that has been chosen. Mr. Cross has been there. Again, I'm a longstanding resident, leader, service provider, and I support the redevelopment of the Pimlico site. The points that I want to make clear is that Park Heights is under a major redevelopment plan as we speak. Progress is finally starting for much of the work needed in the neighborhoods. We are happy to see the reference to the General Assembly working with the Pimlico Community Advisory Board, but all we want to make sure is that the bill is a financial commitment to support the work that's being done to cover vacant houses, grants to help seniors with needed repairs. We need new businesses to come in and take care of the old businesses that are there. We would like to see more improvements to safety enhancements and to continue on in that vein. Again, I support all the work that has been done by the commission, our legislators, our governor to finally move the plan forward to keep Preakness in place and in Baltimore. But hear me clearly. I need you not to forget the residents, the people that have lived there all their lives, businesses, the legacy homeowners. We need you to remember us as you go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the sponsors of this bill. I too had the chance to visit Park Heights a few years ago and had a tour and was very impressed with the commitment of the committee resolved to keeping the neighbors intact. And I appreciate the comments the pastor just made regarding that. So in the legislation, there are specificities as it relates to keeping Park Heights residents in the community so that they can afford, because many times when redevelopment occurs, it means that the residents are unable to live there. So you have some safeguards for the residents or community members in place. Maybe that's better for Delegate Rosenberg.
That's why we created the compact. And that's why we put language to that effect in the bill, in our bill. And that's why we're heartened by the fact that there is appropriate language in and a commitment, binding commitment in the authorities bill. And I would also just point out, mention was made of LifeBridge. LifeBridge is also is now building a cancer facility, a significant cancer facility on their campus with some state bond money as evidence of their commitment as was asked by a previous member, as evidence of their commitment to the site and to the community.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 1416, Senate Bill 16, Senator Kagan.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, colleagues. I would pun that I'm not going to be horsing around on the next 3 bills, but that seems like a bad way to launch, you know. Madam Chair, which bill would you like me to do first? Okay, thank you. For the record, Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville, and back today with a bill that would codify and set guardrails for our exploratory and draft committees. Now, every one of us in this room has a campaign committee. We're capped as to the amount of money we can raise. We are required to disclose it, where it comes from and what we spend it on. Exploratory committees don't have any of those guardrails. And this bill would not create a cap on donations because that's unconstitutional, but it would require transparency, which doesn't exist right now at all, and would also set very clear parameters as to what the money raised can be spent on. So an exploratory committee is when someone is thinking about running for another office. They have to set up another bank account, they start raising money, and today they can take any amount of money at all and spend it on anything they want. It is then also never disclosed. Now, last year when we had this conversation, there were questions from the good vice chair as to whether we had a need to include draft committees, and that's obviously the wisdom of this committee. I think if this just were to discuss exploratory committees, that's what would move the needle the most. It comes to you as both, and specifies that the things you can spend money on is not a new Maserati or a house, which are both legal today, but on polls, on mailers, on computers, on hiring staff, on leasing office space. And you can't prepay, and that's clear in the bill. So you can't pay for 2 years of rent and for your campaign committee. You can't prepay your campaign manager for a year of his or her salary. You can't buy TV ads for 6 months. None of that would be possible. But you can do a poll. You can see if your campaign is viable. You can do a mailer to see whether that helps your poll data. You can do online ads. The list is specific as to what it can be used for. And I don't want to take a lot of the committee's time. I am happy to take your questions, but this seems, I propose it as a common sense bill that would allow us to have greater transparency and guardrails. And these currently virtually totally unregulated entities. Thank you all.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for bringing this bill again. I remember working on it last year. The timing of this is interesting because we just had today the Circuits Court ruling that the legal defense fund of a certain candidate, the donors to which we're going to continue to be shielded. I think their rationale was that it's for a separate legal defense, doesn't really have anything to do with the campaigns, therefore not treated the same. This, however, is explicitly for the campaign.
Yes.
and relating directly to it. And then there's definitely a sort of this gray area of how the two overlap. But in terms of transparency, why is this bill needed more now than ever?
Thank you for the question. I think we all believe in transparency. I think we've all seen how our constituents have gotten cynical about elections, about politics, about us. And it's just a further way of reassuring people that we're doing the best we can and that we're doing it out in the open. So again, people could still collect any amount from anyone that's allowed to donate, but they would have to do it in the sunshine. They would have to comply with transparencies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Hornberger.
Okay, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 16, Senate Bill 29.
Senate Bill 29 is a bill you all are probably familiar with, very familiar with, because the conversation about filling vacancies has been ongoing. It's a little awkward because many of our colleagues have been appointed. And the question is, what's the right balance between those legislators who have been appointed versus elected? And this is a compromise bill that would say, if it's nearly the first 2 years, that people who have been nominated and appointed by the central committees, the Democratic and Republican central committees, that they would face the voters. And in this case, this year, in the presidential primary in May and the presidential general in November, there would be no added cost to our counties, and yet there would be some visibility, some accountability. I suspect that most appointees would be easily elected or reelected because they're doing a good job. They have name recognition. They have the title of delegate or senator. But if they were really being irresponsible, if there were questions raised, if someone ran against them, the voters would have the opportunity to take action and to choose someone else. In the final 2 years after the presidential campaign, the central committees would be unchanged. Those appointments would be made and they would serve until the state election year, when the appointee would either run or choose not to. So this is the compromise bill. You all have the Delegate Foley cross-file, and as amended, this bill is identical to Delegate Foley's bill. And again, happy to take questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, seeing no questions, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 29, Senate Bill 115.
Now that it's after crossover, all the HBs are turning SBs and vice versa in our body. For the record, Cheryl Kagan again. This is a recount bill that once again passed unanimously. This is literally updating the code to get rid of old technology and to make clear how recounts would happen. So this is not a hypothetical. I think everyone in this committee remembers that in Frederick County, there was a 1 vote difference in one of the races. Baltimore County, 9 vote difference. Montgomery County, 79 votes in 2018 and 35 votes in 2022. So how do we do our recounts? And what systems should we use? And I just want to mention that the biggest change that we have is the skyrocketing number of, quote, internet delivered ballots. And I just want to do a very quick show and tell, because unless you have spent a bunch of time in watching the canvas, it's new to folks. So maybe people watching from home will find this especially interesting. So if someone asks for an internet delivered ballot, they think, oh, I bank by mail, I shop by mail, I may even date by mail. So sure, I'll just vote by mail, easy. And they think they're going to get a link and go click, click, click and make their selections and email it back. They don't realize how it actually works. And so they have to print a ballot on their home computer or a computer on their printer. So first off, they have to have a printer. They have to have toner cartridge. They have to have paper in it. Then they have to have a number 10 envelope. And so when it comes out of the printer, it looks something like this. And that's what they vote on. Then they either have to have a number 10 envelope and pay their own postage, because everyone else is postage paid in a mail-in ballot, but this is not. So they have to have the money and have a stamp or take it to a drop-off box. But that's only the first part. Because then when it arrives at your local boards of elections, this cannot go through the scanner. Why? It's not the right weight of paper. It doesn't have the right coding. It doesn't have the right, it's not compliant. It's not compatible. So what happens to your piece of paper, your constituents, our constituents' pieces of paper? Well, it has to be manually duplicated on a ballot, which is time consuming and it's expensive. And it has to be done by bipartisan teams. So someone calls out a name, the other person colors in the circle, blah, blah, blah. They work their way down the ballot. And then they usually switch places to verify accuracy. So when we're talking about a recount that might be 1 vote or 9 votes, 12 votes, we're going to really be looking at it very, very carefully to make sure that the voter's intent, what they did at home, and how it was transcribed and duplicated, make sure that every single time that that's accurate. So this bill is especially important for that. So it gets rid of systems we no longer have, and it clarifies the options of recounts. Frankly, the most important thing is it adds language as to what to do with these. Now, if this comes in the mail, comes to the local board of elections, and it's duplicated, and then this is thrown away or put in a random pile over here, then how can you verify that this was duplicated accurately? So this bill says they have to be kept together for verification if there's a recount, and that if there's a difference, you got to take a look at it. Does this accurately reflect the voter intent? If not, it has to go to the Board of Elections. They have to look at it, and then that which is the voter intent is the one that shall be counted. All of that is needed in this recount bill, which does not address internet delivered ballots. So forgive the going into details here, but it's complicated, it's detail oriented as can be, and it's really important. And we have had close elections. I think we need to update our recount laws. And again, this passed the Senate unanimously. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Senator Kagan, for these 3 bills. I don't believe I see any questions. So that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 115.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good to see you.
Absolutely good to see you too. All right, we thank our wonderful senators for their patience today. We'll now call up Senate Bill 72, Senator McCray.
Madam Vice Chair, it's always good to be in this room. For the record, Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th Legislative District. I'll definitely be brief, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 72 is a direct cross file to House Bill 147. Delegate Hartman passed out of this committee with 18 yeas, and it also passed on the floor with 134 yeas.
Perfect testimony. Thank you so much, Senator McCray.
Do it one more time.
Seeing no questions, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 72. Senate Bill 342.
Thank you again, Madam Vice Chair. For the record, Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th District. And today I'm here for Senate Bill 342. This is a direct cross file with House Bill 287 by Delegate Charkoudian. It passed out of this committee with 11 yeas, and it also passed on the floor with 138 yeas.
Just 2 out of 2, perfect testimony.
That's
Thank
what
you
I'm
so
talking
much. All right. Seeing no questions, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 342. We do have Senator Alonzo Washington next, but I don't see him in the room. We'll reach him.
Vice Chair, I'll be handling that.
Oh, okay, perfect, wonderful. Senator Jackson, we have you, I believe, on two bills. We'll start with Senate Bill 191.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'll try to be as brief as my colleague. Senate Bill 191, Madam Chair, is a Prince George's County local piece of legislation that's passed out unanimously in the Senate. What it does, it authorizes Prince George's County government to offer property tax credits to employees, all employees of the school system who've been there over 2 years and who have decided to relocate to the county. Again, it authorizes, and we'd ask for a favorable report.
Thank you so much, Senator. Seeing no questions, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 191. You can now begin on Senate Bill 321.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Senator Michael Jackson, District 27, on behalf of Senate Bill 321, which is now, after amendments, you should have in your packet a direct cross file of House Bill 765, which is cross file with Delegate Wells. And we'd ask for a favorable report. Passed out unanimously in the Budget and Taxation Subcommittee, as well as the Senate, full Senate. And we'd ask for a favorable report.
Thank you so much, Senator. Seeing no questions, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 321. Thanks for your patience today.
Thank you. If I might, it's always great to be back in the House of Delegates. So always good to be home.
All right.
Cool.
We'll now begin the hearing on Senate Bill 502.
Well, good afternoon. No, Madam Vice Chair, Senate Bill 502 passed the Senate 4-0. It is in the same posture as House Bill 636 that passed the House floor 130-1. Answer any questions that you may have, ma'am.
The senators are giving excellent testimony, blowing us away today. All right, I see no questions, so thank you so much, Senator McKay. That ends the hearing on House Bill 502. Now calling up Mr. Demarinis, our State Administrator of Elections, Senate Bill 271 and Senate Bill 291, both of which I believe have passed through this committee.
Yes, so Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections, record. Senate Bill 291 is in the same posture as House Bill 14, which passed unanimously here. So no further, submit that. Right, exactly.
All right, perfect. So you just did 291.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Seeing no.
No, 271 was House Bill 14.
Okay, 271.
Yes.
Seeing no questions, we'll end the hearing on Senate Bill 271. And are you also presenting on 291?
Yes.
Okay.
Michael Laurie here too, but
Okay.
Senate Bill 291 is a departmental bill. It is in the same posture as House Bill 112. That will also pass unanimously out of the House. So both are.
Wonderful and good to see you, Mr. Lohr. Thanks for being here. All right, so seeing no questions again, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 291.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our final bill of the day, Senate Bill 283, a departmental bill. Josh Greenberg presenting.
Sorry, guys, you haven't passed this one yet, so I'm gonna need to tell you a little about it. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Greenberg here on behalf of the Department of Assessments and Taxation. Senate Bill 283, relatively simple bill. It would streamline the application process for the homeowner's tax credit by allowing applicants to simply attest to their income in lieu of submitting a tax return if the applicant's income did not require that they file one. So the homeowner's tax credit was initially established to allow struggling homeowners to significantly lower their tax burden if they fall below certain income and net worth thresholds. We require detailed accounting of the applicant's income and expenses. Say you don't have a tax return, sometimes we'll require a 1099 SSA, a 1099-R, and if you are an elderly applicant, you might not have that information because you don't need to file your taxes. So in these situations, these requirements can be burdensome. They can require multiple filing attempts by the applicant before they're accepted for a credit. This would create a more streamlined and equitable process for struggling applicants by allowing them to attest under penalty of perjury. So if they lie, they are guilty of, or they've committed perjury, that they were not required by law to submit a tax return and thus didn't file one. This bill would reduce the need for multiple requests for documentation and allow applicants who are critically in need quick and easy access to vital funding. Accordingly, the department respectfully requests a favorable report. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Not seeing any questions from members, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 283. Thanks so much. That ends the hearings for the day in the Ways and Means Committee. Everyone enjoy your evening.